This is a summary of what took place here. It was on the night of November the 8th, 1861. These 5 Union men, along with others who mostly remain unknown, carried out the orders of President Abraham Lincoln, transmitted to General George H. Thomas and given to their leader, Captain David Fry, to burn the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad Bridge over nearby Lick Creek. All 5 men were summarily executed by Confederate authorities. The 5 executions left nearly 20 fatherless children. Henry Harmon was the youngest of the 2 sons who were there. The older son was Thomas Harmon. But what got Henry Harmon hanged, I guess, more than anything else, was that when they burned the bridge, the men had taken all their gear off, and some of them were holding horses, and some of them were holding guns, and some of them were burning the bridge. They were trying to be sure that they had everything because it was dark, and somebody said, "Where's Henry Harmon's gun?" And somebody said, "I'm holding it." So they heard Henry Harmon's name. These men weren't local men, the Confederate bridge guards. They didn't know anybody in the crowd, but they heard the name. So that was what got Henry Harmon hanged, for taking up arms against the Confederate government. Christopher Alexander Haun, he went by the initials CA or Alex. Most people called him Alex. He was, I believe, 40 years old. He had 5 children. He was probably, if not the finest potter that Tennessee ever produced, he was one of the finest. His pottery is on exhibit in the Frisk Center in Nashville. The picture on the left here is a piece of Christopher Haun's pottery. It's a very collectible item now, very few pieces of it in existence. I was able to get that one here in Greene County. It's on display down in the East Tennessee Historical Society in what they call the Bridge Burner display of the People of the Land exhibit. And the photographs here of Captain Fry and John McCoy, I located those in Jefferson County in 2006. Until 2006, no one had any idea what David Fry looked like. There's no picture of him in existence anywhere. Nobody had ever seen one of him. David Fry died in 1872, and his widow remarried a man in Jefferson County, a man named William Tillett. And she moved down there, but she took these things with her that had belonged to Fry, a lot of them. The daughter who married in Jefferson County, her name was Woods. And the Woods family, one of the great-great-grandsons, lived a half mile from me. For many years, he had no idea who David Fry was, and I had no idea he was David Fry's great-great-grandson. It was just a freak thing that we finally found it out. We went out in the shop, and he pulled out the picture. There's David Fry with he and his wife in his full colonel uniform, and here's a tintype of David Fry and John McCoy. Now, he said, I've got their Bibles in the house that it's got all their names and death dates and everything in it. And anyway, after a lot of talking and him learning what we were trying to do and what we wanted to do with it, he sold it to us at a very reasonable price, and it's on display in the East Tennessee Historical Society in Knoxville. He wanted to keep a couple of pieces. When Fry first went to Camp Dick Robinson, Kentucky, he went in as an enlisted man. In a matter of a few days, he was elected an officer. But in that few days, he had an enlisted man Union Army belt buckle, and he brought that home with him, and he still had his Union Army belt buckle and his cartridge pouch that they carried on the belt with the cartridges and caps on it. It was actually a cap pouch. He had those 2 things. He said, I've got a couple of boys that I won't keep those for them. I'm not going to sell those, but I'll put them on display at the museum, so they're down there too. The picture over here was taken from Parson Brownlow's book. It went by the name of Parson Brownlow's book, but I think the exact title of it was The Rise and Fall of the Confederacy. But when they finally let him out of the Knoxville jail after the men were hanged, he went to Philadelphia swearing all the time, if I ever get out of here, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to make the world aware of what you people are doing here, hanging these East Tennessee people. So he went to Philadelphia. He got a woodcutter to make these cuts for him. There's 3 or 4 of them. This is the one, the execution of Harmon and his son. There's one of the execution of Haun sitting on his coffin before he was hanged. And there's another one of Fry and Hinshaw hanged from the oak tree up at Greenville near the railroad tracks. and he had those published in his book, and the Confederacy got a lot of adverse publicity from it. I first became interested in the men who burned the bridges in 1958 when I was 22 years old. That'd be about 54 years ago. And there were still people living at the time who knew people who remembered these men. And I tried to talk to a number of them. Some of them were in my wife's family, and my wife wasn't a direct descendant, but her grandfather was a brother to it was actually her great-great-grandfather was a brother to Jacob Harmon, who was hanged. So it was a collateral descendant, but nobody in that family could tell me much. I don't think that they were withholding information, they just really didn't know that much about it. Some of the other families, there were people who knew things, but they wouldn't talk about them. Their families had always told them, you know, that's something we're all ashamed of. We don't talk about it. We try to forget it. What had happened after these men were hanged, Colonel Ledbetter was a master propagandist. He came in here and he told these people these men were traitors. He told the family, he said, you bury those men outside the fence. You're not going to bury them in there with decent people. They made them bury the father and son outside the fence. Later on, they enlarged the cemetery and took the graves in, but that was the sort of thing that was done, and the people were intimidated. They came here and took property from the widow Harmon, part of her land. Brownlow fought for years in the Congress all the way into the 1870s to get part of her land back. The idea for the monument, I guess, originated with me at the time I'm talking about 50 years ago. Not exactly a monument, but some way to memorialize the men. I had no idea how. I really didn't know that much about them at the time, but I knew it was something that should be done.